The rain came without warning, thick, cold, and unforgiving, as if the sky itself knew what had just happened inside Sterling Logistics. Marcus Cole stepped through the glass doors, carrying a cardboard box pressed against his chest. 15 years of his life reduced to whatever fit inside it. His worn gray work shirt, the same one he'd ironed that morning with hope, was already soaking through. The termination papers crumpled in his fist were turning to pulp. 43 years old? Weathered face marked by stubble and a lifetime of early mornings. Hands calloused from loading trucks, fixing machinery, training new employees. Hands that had given everything to these warehouse floors. Now those hands trembled slightly as rain streamed down his face, plastering his dark hair to his forehead. The parking lot stretched empty around him. Everyone else still warm and employed inside. He'd walked these grounds 5,000 times, knew every crack in the pavement, every flickering light in Lot C. Now he walked them like a ghost, passing through a life that no longer belonged to him. His phone buzzed against his thigh. A text from Maya, his 12-year-old daughter. "Dad, did you get the promotion?" Marcus stared at the screen, rain droplets blurring the hopeful words. His chest tightened. He couldn't answer. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Not with the truth. 15 years of perfect attendance. 3 Employee of the Year awards. First to arrive, last to leave. And none of it had mattered. Not to the man in the corner office, who'd never bothered to learn his name. 2 hours earlier, Marcus had been summoned to the executive floor for the first time in his career. He'd allowed himself to hope. The supervisor position had been posted for weeks, and everyone in the warehouse said he was the obvious choice. "You've earned it, Cole," they'd told him, about damn time. Instead, he found Richard Sterling barely acknowledging his presence. The corner office gleamed with chrome and glass, everything sharp and cold. Richard sat behind a desk that probably cost more than Marcus's truck, his tailored suit pristine, an expensive watch glinting on his wrist. He never looked up from his laptop, not once during the entire exchange. "Mr. Cole, your position has been deemed redundant. We're eliminating the entire department. Security will escort you out." Marcus stood frozen, the words hitting him like a physical blow. "Sir, I've been here 15 years. I trained half the warehouse staff. 15 years of institutional overhead," Richard interrupted, fingers still dancing across his keyboard. "My father was sentimental. I am not. The severance package is standard. HR will provide details." 30 seconds. 15 years. Reduced to 30 seconds. Marcus thought of his children. Jalen, 14, and trying so hard to be the man of the house. Maya, 12, and still believing her father could fix anything. He thought of the mortgage payment due in 2 weeks. He thought of his wife's grave, 3 rows back in Riverside Cemetery, and the promise he'd whispered to her headstone every Sunday since she'd passed. "I'll keep them stable, baby. I'll keep them safe." This job had been that promise made tangible. Richard Sterling had erased it without a second glance. Marcus walked out with his dignity intact. But inside, something had shattered. The wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour as Marcus's old pickup truck crawled along the highway. The rain had intensified, turning the world into a gray smear of nothing. The road ahead desolate and unforgiving. He drove in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. The smell of rain and old truck interior filled his nose, familiar scents that now felt like reminders of everything he was about to lose. What could I have done differently? He replayed the moment over and over. The laptop, the cold words, the way Richard Sterling had dismissed 15 years like clearing a line item from a spreadsheet. Thunder rumbled in the distance. What am I going to tell the kids? His late wife's voice drifted through his memory, soft as the day she'd spoken the words from her hospital bed. Marcus, you are the strongest man I know. Whatever happens, our babies will be okay, because they have you. He wasn't sure he believed that anymore. Then, through the sheets of rain hazard lights, a luxury red SUV sat crooked on the shoulder, one tire deflated and dying, and beside it a woman, completely drenched. A striking red leather outfit clung to her frame, dark hair plastered to her face and shoulders, designer heels sinking into the wet pavement as she stood there, helpless against the storm. Every part of Marcus screamed to keep driving. He had his own wreckage to sort through, his own storm to survive. Why should he stop for a stranger when the world had just refused to stop for him? But then he heard it again, Enric, his wife's voice, clear as memory. Marcus, you help people. That's who you are. Don't ever let the world change that. He pulled over. The rain hit him like a wall as he stepped out, cold soaking through to his bones instantly. He approached the woman, boots splashing through puddles, and called out over the thunder, "Ma'am, need a hand?" She turned and relief flooded her features. Beautiful, even drenched. Elegant, even shivering. Her red leather pants and fitted top were soaked through, and her dark eyes held genuine distress. Oh, thank God. Her voice carried a refinement that spoke of country clubs and charity galas. I've been out here 20 minutes. I tried calling, but there's no signal, and I don't... She gestured helplessly at the flat tire, her hands shaking from the cold. I don't know how to change a tire. I got it. Marcus moved toward the SUV, rain streaming down his weathered face. Pop the trunk? She did, and he located the spare, the jack, the lug wrench. His movements were efficient, practiced. Years of warehouse work, of fixing what was broken, of solving problems nobody else wanted to touch. He knelt in the rain, the cold soaking through his work pants, mud seeping into the fabric at his knees. The woman hovered nearby, trying to hold her designer clutch over his head as a makeshift umbrella. You'll ruin your shoes worse than they already are, ma'am, he said gently, waving her off. At least let me... She faltered, watching his hands work. Calloused, scarred, competent. You really didn't have to stop. Marcus looked up, rain streaming down his face. Something in her voice, the genuine gratitude, the disbelief, loosened something in his chest. Ma'am, my mother raised me to believe that what you do when nobody's watching is who you really are. He turned back to the lug nuts, his voice steady despite the chaos still churning inside him. I couldn't drive past. Most people would have. Most people aren't me. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition of something rare. She placed her hand on his shoulder, a gesture of gratitude that felt almost reverent. He noticed her watching the sadness in his eyes, the weight he carried in his silence. She tried to make conversation, apologizing for the inconvenience, commenting on the storm. He responded with quiet courtesy, nothing more. 20 minutes in the freezing rain. When Marcus finished tightening the final lug nut and checking the tire pressure, he stood, soaked completely, mud caked on his knees, his gray shirt clinging to him like a second skin. Please, the woman said, reaching into her clutch. At least let me repay you somehow. She pressed a business card into his hand. Dinner, money, something You've been so kind." Marcus took the card to be polite. He glanced down. The words blurred in the rain, but he saw them clearly enough. Elena Sterling, Sterling Foundation Chair, Sterling Logistics. His stomach dropped. The world tilted. This woman, this kind, grateful, shivering woman, was married to the man who, 4 hours ago, had ended his career without a second glance. The man who'd called 15 years of dedication institutional overhead. The man who couldn't be bothered to look up from his laptop while destroying a family's stability. Marcus's face remained impassive. Years of swallowing hardship had taught him that. "Safe travels, ma'am." His voice didn't waver. "Get somewhere warm." He pocketed the card, walked back to his truck, and drove away into the storm. Elena Sterling watched his taillights disappear into the rain, something tugging at her heart she couldn't quite name. She didn't know why the stranger's eyes had held such sorrow. She didn't know that he'd recognized her name. She didn't know that her husband had shattered this man's world just hours before he'd knelt in the mud to help her. She only knew that kindness like that was rare, and she wouldn't forget it. Before this story continues, take a moment. If you believe that kindness always finds its way back, if you believe that character matters more than circumstance, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, because sometimes the universe has a plan we can't yet see. The Sterling mansion sat at the end of a long, gated driveway. 12,000 square feet of marble and silence. Too many rooms for 2 people. Too much space for a marriage that had grown cold long before Elena could name it. She stood at the bathroom mirror, towel drying her dark hair, still thinking about the stranger in the rain. She changed into dry clothes an hour ago, but she couldn't shake the chill or the image of his face. Those weathered features, those sad, steady eyes, the way his calloused hands had worked so efficiently, asking nothing, expecting nothing. What you do when nobody's watching is who you really are. The words echoed in her mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. When was the last time someone had shown her kindness without calculation? When was the last time Richard had looked at her the way that stranger had, like she was a person worth helping, not a problem to be managed? She heard the front door open. Richard was home. Elena found him in the dining room, already seated, scrolling through his phone while the housekeeper set out dinner. He didn't look up when she entered. He rarely did anymore. "The most remarkable thing happened today," Elena began, sliding into her chair across the vast mahogany table. She swirled the wine in her glass, watching the burgundy liquid catch the light. "I got a flat tire on Highway 12. No signal, pouring rain. I was completely stranded." Richard glanced up, his expression unchanged. "You should have called roadside assistance." "No signal, Richard." She kept her voice even. But this man stopped. A stranger. "He spent 20 minutes in the freezing rain changing my tire. Wouldn't take a dime. Wouldn't even accept a proper thank you. Probably hoping you'd offer more later." Richard returned to his phone. "Everyone wants something." The words hit her like a slap. She stared at her husband, really stared, and saw something she'd been ignoring for years. The coldness in his eyes, the dismissiveness in his voice, the way he reduced every human interaction to a transaction. "He didn't want anything," Elena said quietly. "That's what made it remarkable." Richard shrugged, not looking up. "You're too trusting. That's always been your problem." Elena said nothing more. But something had shifted in her chest. a crack in the foundation of everything she'd accepted about her life. The contrast between the stranger's quiet warmth and her husband's casual cruelty sat heavy inside her, impossible to ignore. She pushed her food around her plate and wondered about the man with the sad eyes, wondered what weight he'd been carrying that night, wondered if she'd ever see him again. 2 days later, Elena found out. The Community Hope Food Bank occupied a modest brick building on the east side of town, far from the glittering high-rises of Richard's world. Elena had been volunteering here twice a month for 3 years now, her private rebellion against a life that felt increasingly hollow. Here, sorting canned goods and packing boxes, she found purpose that her designer wardrobe and charity galas never provided. She was organizing donations on the back shelf when she looked up at the line of families waiting for assistance. Her hands froze. Her heart stopped. There, in line, was the man from the rain. The same gray work shirt, now dry but just as worn. The same weathered face with its quiet dignity. The same strong, capable hands. Hands that had knelt in the mud to help a stranger. But he wasn't alone. A teenage boy stood beside him, maybe 14, shoulders squared against the indignity of this place. He was trying so hard to look brave, to protect his father from the shame of being seen here. And clutching Marcus's other hand was a girl, 12 perhaps, looking around with wide, uncertain eyes that broke Elena's heart. Before her mind could stop her, Elena's feet carried her forward. She set down the cans and walked toward him, drawn by something stronger than logic. "It's you." Marcus looked up. Recognition flashed across his face, followed immediately by something else. Shame. Not for himself, Elena realized, but for his children, for being recognized in this place, in front of them. "Mrs. Sterling." His voice was level, dignified even now. "Small world. You know my name." It wasn't a question. Saw it on the card. Elena's mind raced. She looked at the children, then back at Marcus, then at the box of canned goods and pasta cradled in his arms. The pieces were falling into place. Terrible, impossible pieces that made her stomach turn. "Why are you here?" But even as she asked, she already knew. Something in his eyes that night, that depth of sorrow, hadn't been just the rain. "Lost my job," Marcus said simply. No self-pity, no bitterness, just fact. "Severance doesn't kick in for 2 weeks. Kids still need to eat." "Where did you work?" A pause. Marcus met her eyes with quiet intensity. "Sterling Logistics, 15 years, got let go on Thursday." Thursday. The same day. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "What time?" "Around 3 in the afternoon." She did the math, and the truth hit her like a physical blow. He was fired at 3. She got her flat tire around 7, 4 hours. 4 hours after her husband destroyed this man's livelihood, after Richard Sterling looked at 15 years of dedication and called it institutional overhead, Marcus Cole had knelt in the freezing rain to change her tire, the wife of the man who had just ruined his life. And he'd said nothing, asked for nothing, just driven away into the storm with his integrity intact. "You knew," Elena whispered, her voice breaking. "You knew who I was when you saw that card, and you still said nothing. You just drove away." Marcus glanced toward his children, ensuring they were occupied at a small bookshelf near the entrance. The boy was pretending to read to his sister, but his eyes kept darting back to his father, protective, worried. When Marcus turned back to Elena, his gaze held a quiet intensity that made her breath catch. "Ma'am, your husband's choices aren't yours, And my troubles weren't your burden to carry in that storm. His voice was steady, certain. You were stranded. You needed help. That's all that mattered in that moment. But after everything, what was I supposed to do? Marcus shook his head slowly. Leave you there to teach him a lesson? Drive past a woman in trouble because her husband wronged me? What kind of man would that make me? Elena couldn't speak. Couldn't find words for the emotion swelling in her chest. My wife. My late wife. She used to say that bitterness is a poison you drink, hoping the other person dies. A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. I won't do that. I won't become that. Not for him. Not for anyone. Elena stood there in the middle of a food bank, her designer clothes suddenly feeling obscene. The cashmere sweater, the diamond studs in her ears, the leather handbag worth more than this man's monthly mortgage. This man, this father, this widower, this stranger who had shown her more humanity in 20 minutes than her husband had shown in 20 years, had more integrity in his calloused hands than Richard Sterling had in his entire empire. Mr. Cole, Marcus, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. He shifted the box of food in his arms, his quiet dignity unshaken. But if you'll excuse me, my kids are waiting. He walked toward the door, collecting Jalen and Maya with gentle authority. Elena watched him go, watched him ruffle his son's hair reassuringly, watched him hoist his daughter onto his hip, despite her being almost too big for it. The girl wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. Elena saw a father, a man, a human being her husband had discarded like outdated inventory, and something inside her caught fire. The Sterling mansion felt different that evening, smaller, colder. The halls that had once impressed her now felt like a mausoleum, a monument to wealth without warmth. Elena found Richard in his home office, surrounded by leather and mahogany, walls lined with awards and accolades that suddenly meant nothing. She didn't knock. She walked in. Richard looked up, irritation flashing across his features. I'm on a call with Tokyo. Hang up. Something in her voice, a steel he'd never heard before, made him pause. He studied her face for a moment, then ended the call. What's this about? Elena stood across from his desk, her voice quiet, controlled, the way she spoke when something mattered too much for volume. The man who changed my tire on Thursday, in the rain. The one I told you about. What about him? His name is Marcus Cole. Elena let each word land like a stone. He has 2 children, a boy named Jalen and a girl named Maya. His wife died 4 years ago. He gave Sterling Logistics 15 years of his life, 3 Employee of the Year awards, never missed a single day of work. And you fired him 4 hours before he stopped to help me. Richard's expression flickered. I don't know every employee. You eliminated his entire department. You told him his 15 years were institutional overhead. Elena's voice remained deadly calm. Those were your words, Richard. His jaw tightened. It was a business decision. I'm restructuring for efficiency. My father let sentimentality cloud his judgment. Your father built that company on people like Marcus Cole. Elena stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. And you're tearing it down in the name of spreadsheets. Elena, I saw him today at the food bank. She let that sink in. With his children, waiting in line for canned goods because your efficiency left him with nothing. Richard said nothing. For once, he had no rebuttal. He knew who I was when he read my card. He knew I was your wife, and he still changed my tire, still asked for nothing, still drove away with his dignity intact. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That man showed more character in 20 minutes in the rain than you've shown in 20 years of marriage. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and undeniable. You will make this right, Richard. Elena straightened. You will find Marcus Cole, and you will make this right, or I will make sure every board member, every investor, every newspaper in this city knows exactly what kind of man runs Sterling Logistics. She turned and walked out without waiting for his response. Richard sat alone in the darkness long after Elena left. For the first time in years, he was forced to see himself through someone else's eyes, and what he saw made his stomach turn. He thought of his father, the man who knew every warehouse worker's name, who attended their weddings and their funerals, who built Sterling Logistics on handshakes and trust, the man who would have been ashamed of the son sitting in his chair. He thought of Marcus Cole, fired without a glance, devastated without a thought. And then, hours later, kneeling in the freezing rain to help a stranger, the wife of the man who had just destroyed him. What kind of man does that? And what kind of man doesn't? Richard sat with the question until it became unbearable. Then he picked up the phone. HR? I need everything you have on an employee. Former employee. He paused, the name heavy on his tongue. Marcus Cole. 1 week later, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through job listings on a laptop borrowed from the public library. The screen glowed in the dim morning light, each posting blurring into the next. Warehouse associate, delivery driver, night shift stalker. He'd apply to all of them. He'd apply to anything. The house was quiet. Jalen and Maya had left for school an hour ago, both of them pretending everything was normal, both of them failing. Marcus had seen the worry in his son's eyes, the way Jalen checked the mail every day now, looking for bills he thought his father didn't know about. He'd seen Maya's forced smiles, the way she'd stopped asking for things. No more requests for field trip money or new shoes, even though hers were wearing thin. He'd promised their mother he'd keep them stable. He was trying. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Marcus almost ignored it. Probably a scam or a bill collector or one of the dozen other calls that had become part of his new reality. But something made him answer. Mr. Cole? This is Sterling Logistics. Mr. Sterling would like to meet with you. Today, if possible. Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. What's this about? I'm not at liberty to say, sir. The assistant's voice carried an unusual edge, nervous almost. But Mr. Sterling was insistent. He mentioned it was personal. Personal. The word hung in the air, strange and unexplained. Marcus looked around his modest home, at the bills stacked on the counter, at his children's school pictures on the wall, at the empty space by the window where his wife's reading chair used to be, before he'd sold it to make rent. He thought about the food bank, the shame his kids had tried to hide, the long nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how he'd failed them. He had nothing left to lose. Tell him I'll be there at 3. Sterling Logistics looked different in the afternoon light. Or maybe Marcus was different now. He walked through the glass doors wearing his best shirt, worn at the collar but clean and pressed. His work boots were polished, his spine straight. Employees in the lobby glanced up as he passed, recognition flickering across their faces. News traveled fast in a company this size. They knew who he was. They knew what had happened. Marcus kept his head high. He had nothing to be ashamed of. The security guard who'd escorted him out 2 weeks ago now escorted him to the executive elevator, avoiding his eyes the entire way. Marcus stepped inside alone, watching the floor numbers climb. 37 floors. The same elevator he'd ridden 2 weeks ago, full of hope about a promotion that never came. Now he rode it with something else. Not hope, but something steadier. Peace, maybe. The quiet certainty of a man who knew exactly who he was, regardless of what waited at the top. The doors opened onto the executive floor. Glass and chrome and money. Everything Marcus's life wasn't. A young assistant met him, her heels clicking on marble as she led him past conference rooms and corner offices, past walls lined with awards and photographs of Richard, Sterling's father, the man who'd built this empire on handshakes and trust. She stopped at the largest door of all. "Mr. Sterling will see you now." Marcus stepped inside. The corner office stretched before him, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Outside, clouds were gathering again. More rain on the horizon, the sky bruised purple and gray. Richard Sterling stood behind his desk. Actually stood. His hands hung at his sides, and unless Marcus was imagining it, they were trembling slightly. But it was the figure in the corner that made everything click into place. Elena sat in a leather chair by the window, her presence quiet but unmistakable. She met Marcus's eyes and gave a small nod. This was her doing, all of it. "Mr. Cole," Richard's voice came out strained. "Marcus, please sit. I'll stand if it's all the same." A pause. Richard nodded slowly, accepting the boundary. "I've been informed that I made an error," he began. "A significant one." The words came haltingly, like a language he'd never learned to speak. "I'm not good at this. Apologies." Richard glanced at his wife, then back at Marcus. "My father built this company on relationships. I've spent 6 months dismantling them in the name of efficiency. I told myself it was necessary, progress. But I've been shown—" Another glance at Elena. "I've been reminded that numbers on a spreadsheet used to be people, and I forgot that." Marcus said nothing. He waited. "I appreciate the words, Mr. Sterling." His voice was steady, measured. "But words don't pay my mortgage. Words don't feed my kids." "I know." Richard picked up a folder from his desk, extending it toward Marcus. "Which is why I'm offering you a position. Director of Employee Relations. It's a new department. One I should have created instead of eliminating yours. You'd report directly to the board." He paused. "Not to me." Marcus looked at the folder, then at Elena, who gave another small nod, then back at the man who had destroyed his life with 30 seconds of cold indifference. "I don't want charity," Marcus said slowly, "and I don't want revenge. This isn't either." Richard's jaw tightened with something that might have been shame. "This is me acknowledging that I need someone who understands what this company was supposed to be, what my father built, and clearly—" His voice cracked slightly. "I'm not that person, but maybe I can learn, and maybe you can help." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then he spoke. "If I take this position, things change. People aren't line items. Layoffs happen to human beings with families. If I'm Director of Employee Relations, I need the authority to actually advocate for employees, to protect them. Done. And I want the names of everyone else let go in my department. I want exit interviews. I want to know who needs help and what we can do for them." Richard hesitated. From the corner, Elena's gaze sharpened, a warning he didn't miss. Done. Marcus extended his hand. Richard took it. For the first time, he truly looked at the man in front of him. The calloused palms, the quiet strength, the unbowed spine. The kind of man his father would have respected. The kind of man Richard had never learned to be. Welcome to the executive team, Mr. Cole. One more thing. Marcus didn't release the handshake. That night in the rain, I didn't help your wife because I'm a saint. I helped her because that's what decent people do. We show up. We do the hard thing. We don't calculate what we'll get in return. Richard's expression flickered. Then why are you here? Because my kids need stability. Marcus finally released his grip. And because maybe this company needs someone to remind it what your father actually built. Elena was waiting in the hallway when Marcus emerged. Thank you, she said quietly, for more than you know. You didn't have to do any of this, Mrs. Sterling. Yes, I did. She paused, something soft in her eyes. That night, in the rain, you could have driven past. You could have let your anger make you small. But you didn't. You reminded me that character isn't about circumstances. It's about choices. Marcus considered her words. Your husband is a work in progress. A bittersweet smile crossed her face. Like all of us. She extended her hand and Marcus shook it. Two strangers who'd met in a storm, now standing in the calm. Thank you for stopping, Marcus. For me, and for him. 1 week later, laughter filled the Cole kitchen for the first time in what felt like forever. Maya chattered about her science project, while Marcus served mashed potatoes. Real groceries now, bought with his first paycheck. Not food bank donations. Jalen pretended to be too cool to care about any of it. But Marcus caught him sneaking glances across the table, checking to make sure this was real. It was real. Dad, I still don't get it. Jalen set down his fork, his teenage face wrestling with something heavy. That guy fired you. His wife saw you at the food bank. Weren't you embarrassed? Marcus set down the serving spoon. He looked at his son, really looked, the way his own father used to when something important needed saying. Jay, embarrassment is what happens when you care more about how things look than how they are. He let the words settle. I was at that food bank to feed my family. That's not shame. That's love. Jalen didn't respond, but something shifted in his eyes. And that woman in the rain, Marcus continued. She didn't see a fired employee. She saw a man who stopped to help a stranger. That's the version of me I want you both to remember. Maya looked up from her plate, her eyes bright with a question she'd been holding for weeks. Daddy, does this mean we don't have to move? Marcus pulled her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. No, sweetheart, we're staying right here. Silence fell over the table, the good kind, the kind that holds weight. Then Jalen reached across and squeezed his father's arm. His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. Mom would be proud of you, Dad. Marcus's eyes glistened. He didn't trust his voice. He just nodded, holding his children close, feeling the warmth of everything he'd almost lost. Later that evening, Marcus stood at the kitchen window. Behind him, Jalen and Maya sat at the table doing homework, their heads bent over textbooks, the soft scratch of pencils filling the silence. Normal sounds, safe sounds, the sounds of a family that had survived a storm. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, and through the gaps, the last light of sunset painted the sky in streaks of gold and amber. And there, faint but unmistakable, a rainbow arced across the horizon. Marcus watched it form, thinking about storms and strangers and the strange way life folded back on itself. 2 weeks ago, he'd walked out of Sterling Logistics with nothing but a cardboard box and a broken heart. Tonight, he stood in his kitchen, his children safe, his future restored, because he'd made a choice in the rain. Not a calculated choice, not a strategic choice, just a human one. His mother's voice echoed one final time. What you do when nobody's watching is who you really are. Marcus smiled. Outside, the rainbow held, fragile and bright, a promise that storms don't last forever, and that sometimes the help we give comes back to us in ways we never could have imagined. Character isn't built in boardrooms or measured in quarterly reports. It's forged in the rain, on lonely roads, in the moments when no one would blame you for driving past. Marcus Cole didn't know that night that his kindness would change his life. He just knew that a stranger needed help, and that was enough.